Why children should not experience Pohakuloa Training Area. This April 18th, school groups and the public are invited to spend a day experiencing the U.S. Army at Pohakuloa Training Area on Hawaii Island. The following video will explain why it is not a good idea for our children to be near this live-fire training range. This Visit Pohakuloa poster totally disregards repeated warnings that children visiting this war game theater may negatively harm the child's health. Radiation is blowing on the wind. Depleted uranium oxide, contaminated artillery range. Pohakuloa is contaminated with depleted uranium oxide. For 75 years, for 24/7, war games in Hawaii with no cleanup. And DU oxides could be on any wind gust. Pohakuloa is bombed daily. Toxins are carried on the wind daily. We do not consent. Winds any day at Pohakuloa are 20 to 30 miles an hour. DU oxide radiation, if inhaled, is the deadliest radiation. Depleted uranium coming to your neighborhood. Depleted uranium, the news doesn't seem that good. It's radioactive dust that is killing us round live fire ranges and combat zones.
Oh, we're here to counter the military's Earth Day propaganda that they can celebrate Earth Day by bombing the Earth and polluting with all the toxins. And I'm happy to say that the number of schools and going in today, I would estimate 25% to a third of what was here last year. So a dramatic reduction. We sent these notices out to every school on the island. So it seems to have had an effect. And even the buses, there's only been 4 buses that have gone in, and only about 10 kids in a bus. So instead of packed buses, I think maybe parents put their foot down on it to won't let their kids come up there, which is good. Because this DU, especially exposing young kids or pregnant women to the DU dust exposure, is a serious health issue. So I hope they watch Dr. Pang's video here on the health hazards. Some good signs that the numbers are dramatically down. So people aren't buying this propaganda of the military supporting Earth.
Taking care of the earth.
Yeah, ridiculous.
I'm taking the readings of how many counts on the radiation readings here. So I'm guessing it's averaging about 36, but it's spiking here. I have a spike at 918 that went up to 68. So that's pretty high for the wind that's coming off the north. If the wind was coming off the base, it'd probably be higher. Well, yeah, I'm surprised that it's as high as it is. You know? And you think, you know, these are young school children who are coming on to, they're using the school children as PR to show it's safe when it isn't, right? That's really evil. You know?
Thank you. Here we are at Pohakuloa Training Area main gate, where several buses of children have come in because the military is going to try to convince these children that they're good land stewards, and they're not. We have been trying for over 13 years to get air testing done because we get these high radiation spikes And we want to know exactly what it is, and they will not air test.
Yeah, I'm here because the Army is celebrating Earth Day here at Pohakuloa on the island of Hawaii. And it's very odd for them to be celebrating Earth Day when they're the very ones destroying the Earth. They're creating the most toxins on the planet, more than any corporation on the planet, and more than any other military on the planet. So it's odd that they're celebrating Earth Day and they're inviting busloads of children to come in and learn about their weapons and things like that, trying to entertain the kids into becoming interested in joining the Army. And they're killing people around the planet, not for the defense of the United States, but for gain. They want to take resources from other countries, and they actually go out there and cause some kind of injury to themselves, and then they blame some other country, like 911, the Twin Towers. The United States destroyed that themselves, and they blame somebody else, so they have an excuse to go and attack them.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pang. I speak as a private citizen. I'm going to speak from my PowerPoint presentation. You can't see it, but you have it. If you go to the website, Poisoning Paradise, there's a video where they videoed my PowerPoint presentation. I'll give you a little bit background about myself. I'm born and raised in Hawaii. I'm retired Army Medical Corps, 24 years. I was a researcher for Walter Reed Institute of Research for most of the time. My job was to, I'm a physician, test drugs and vaccines and diagnostics against tropical diseases. I was a consultant and loaned to the World Health Organization for 20 years before I retired and came back to Hawaii. I am on the America's Best Doctors list beginning in 2007. I'm a consultant for the last 5 years to the US Congress. We fund a few to several hundred millions of dollars worth of grants every year in all areas of science. Now, let me tell you a little bit relatively important things about myself. I'm a graduate of Princeton University. I honors graduate in chemistry, but I had also 4 years of mathematics and physics. The people who take on this issue should study very well the physics of dust dispersion, and why some dust does certain things and other particles of dust does not. The other thing you need to know to take on this issue is chemistry. There's quite a big difference in the chemistry between depleted uranium and depleted uranium oxide. When you burn or blow up uranium, it converts to depleted uranium oxide. So that's about all you need. Heavy dose of chemistry and some of physics. I am quite shocked over the last 15 years, the statements that have come out of the Army regarding the risk that their weapons have or don't have. They are not based in any physics that I knew. And I think we have a professor emeritus retired, Dr. Mike Reimer, who lives in Kona, Colorado School of Mines. We have other PhDs who agree with me. We do not seem to agree too well with the military's position, although I am retired Army Medical Corps. And there are some military PhDs, Doug Rocky, who are dissenting opinions to the mainstream military position. Okay, let's take a little step backwards and try to explain for the general public, see if we can understand what's going on. Uranium. It's kind of a common mineral. It's naturally radioactive. But when we take uranium that's been mined, it's not that rare, we find that you need to enrich it or deplete it. In other words, you take the raw material, you centrifuge it, and the centrifuge was split off according to the weight. There's different weights of uranium, hot stuff, which is good for reactors. It's so hot that it self-propagates, and it kind of makes a chain reaction, and you got your nuclear reactor. Now, the nuclear reactor, it's all over the world, it doesn't turn into a bomb because you can control the chain reaction. So that's the hot stuff. The other stuff, because you separated out your uranium by centrifuge, is called depleted uranium. It's still radioactive, but not that hot, not great to make a nuclear reactor. So after the years, the decades of enriching uranium, what do you do with the depleted uranium? Well, it's just piling up behind barbed wire fences. We don't really know what to do with it. And it was not really worth too much until, say, 80 years after they discovered it. So what have we learned about depleted uranium? It emits alpha radiation. Now, you kind of have to learn this if you're going to track this argument. There's different kind of radiation, alpha, beta, gamma. And then there's some other light radiation, thermal radiation. But as far as what they call ionizing radiation, that means radiation that can change the molecule, change the atom. It can split off the electron, and it can make that atom very, very reactive. That's called ionizing radiation. The ones we deal with from our radioactive particles are alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha particles, the bulk of the radiation from uranium or depleted uranium or enriched uranium is alpha. Alpha are big, fat, huge particles. Then there's beta, which is a little smaller, and gamma, which are very small. So an alpha particle, since it's so big, it will be blocked by a piece of paper. So if I took a chunk of uranium, or depleted or not, in front of you, it will not get past your skin. Your skin will block it. It will not get past a piece of paper. Piece of paper will block it. It will not get past 3 inches of air. 3 inches of air will block it. The alpha particle is so big, it hits other stuff and doesn't hit you. You're afraid that this thing will hit the nuclei, your DNA, and cause mutations. Mutations are bad. They're either going to give you cancer or they're going to give you birth defects if it hits your germ cells. But thank God for the skin. The skin is dead tissue, and underneath it is live, but that first layer of dead tissue, it blocks the alpha. Thank goodness. So that's what we are afraid of, the alpha particles coming out of depleted uranium. So you mean if I got a bowling ball of depleted uranium, and they did this in front of our state legislature, the military did this, theatrics, wasn't it? They put a chunk of uranium and they said, well, I'm not afraid of that. Well, not only that, but it was in a little plastic bag. The plastic bag is blocking the alpha. I agree. So you're not afraid of uranium chunks, are you? The air will block the radiation. Your skin will block the radiation. So what's the problem? The problem is when you breathe the dust. The dust gets into your lung, and when it's small, 5 microns, it really gets into your lung tissue. The job is to exchange oxygen through the blood. There's nothing to block the air. You don't have keratin in your lung. And in the lower lung, you don't have mucus. In the upper airways, you have mucus. That's why you cough and blow your nose. But in the lower airway, you cannot have anything to protect the lung tissue from exchanging. If you did, if you filled your lower lung with mucus, that's called cystic fibrosis. That's a death sentence in the old days. So the lung is one area that there's no protection against radiation. So the depleted uranium, when it's in fine dust form, then it goes into your lung. Then you have problems. That's the physics of it. We were challenged by the military, and the military said that when we blow up depleted uranium, it doesn't generate dust. Well, yes, it does. It doesn't go more than 3 meters. That's nonsense. That's not the physics I learned. It's real clear. The data is obviously there. When you blow up depleted uranium, it causes a fine dust that can travel thousands of miles in maybe a couple of weeks because the dust is so fine it suspends. It is true. Some of the stuff you blow up bumps along because it's not that fine, and some remain big chunks. But when you blow up depleted uranium, 50% goes up as fine dust for us to breathe. That's the physics of it. I think there's no question about it. Dr. Reimer agrees with me, and most of the scientists agree with me. That is a famous military statement. Don't worry about it. Uranium's heavier than air, so it's not going up as dust. That's nonsense. Mercury is heavier than air. When I spill mercury on the ground, we're worried about the mercury vapors. If mercury is heavier than air, why are you worried about the vapors? Because heavy stuff in small particles certainly can travel on the air for great distances. Okay, now time for chemistry. All this stuff, when the NRC tells you we calculated the risk of uranium and it's very low. Are you talking about uranium dust? I would like to see the calculation on that. Next, depleted uranium versus depleted uranium oxide. That's all the difference in chemistry in the world. Oxide is simply you add oxygen to the depleted uranium. Well, does adding oxygen change anything? Well, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. H2 is hydrogen. H2O is water. Water is not like hydrogen. Of course it changes things. So where do we add oxygen? How in the world did we add oxygen to our depleted uranium? You blew it up. When you blew it up in the form of weaponry, it burns. Burning means oxidation. And all those little particles that are now ready for you to breathe, they're oxidized. Depleted uranium oxides. 2 oxygens, 4 oxygens, 5 oxygens, 6 oxygens. So what's the difference? If I breathe depleted uranium dust versus depleted uranium oxides, all the difference in the world. Depleted uranium, it's polarized, it's water soluble. If I had a choice, I would breathe depleted uranium, metal. What happens to it? It goes in my lung, it's dissolved in the blood, water soluble, and I pee it out maybe in 6 weeks because my kidney removes the stuff from the blood. Depleted uranium oxide is not water soluble, it's fat soluble. And instead of peeing it out in 6 weeks like the metal, you pee it out in maybe 6 decades. So it's in your body longer. Well, where does it go? Well, it ain't in the blood. It's not water soluble, it's in the lymph. Well, what do you think the lymph does? The lymph is an archaic, older circulatory system that flows a lot of the water insoluble products. The lymph is responsible for immunity, the white blood cells going around the lymph, the lymphatics. Well, that's where it is. And that doesn't clear too quickly. Decades instead of weeks. So if you look at very carefully the statement by the NRC, we think it has minimum millirems or whatever. I want to see the model that they're dealing with dust and depleted uranium oxides. Now I'm getting ahead a little bit ahead of myself. I have to explain why we piled up all that depleted uranium. They soon discovered that if you take just the metal and you fired it at a high enough speed, it would kind of penetrate and blow up the tank. No explosives, just the impact, like flint on steel. The impact would spark it, cause a high enough temperature, hotter than lava. Lava is what, 2200, 2400? This thing, when it impacts at 3000, and it will cause its own burning so fast that it's explosive. So all of a sudden, you invented a new kind of weaponry, shooting metal slugs of depleted uranium for which we had no purpose whatsoever, hitting something and blowing it up. I saw this demonstrated. Remember, I was retired Army military, 1982 in Egypt. We gave a demonstration of solidarity, and we showed the Egyptians how we could blow up target tanks with nothing more than a high-powered metal. When we do that, I mean, this is a fantastic weapon. It's not nuclear. It just burns. But when you do that by weight, half the amount of your depleted uranium turns to oxides, never to return. So half goes up as dust for us to breathe in the form of depleted uranium oxide. Okay. Well, remember, depleted uranium oxide is still alpha emitter. There's no protection in your lung. And if it radiates and hits the nuclei of the lung cells, that's mutation. Mutations lead to cancer. Or if it goes to your germ cells, your sperm and ovary, birth defects. How in the world does depleted uranium oxide, the alpha emitter, get from your lung to your germ cells? The lymphatics flow everywhere. It was shown that when we inject into This is a classic study. Mice, other alpha emitter, not depleted uranium oxides, alpha emitter, strontium. Just to see what alpha emitter does, we inject it into mice. Let me get this straight now. The mama mouse doesn't have any exposure to strontium-90. The father mouse does. We inject him and it starts to emit alpha. Okay, so they have babies. The babies have birth defects, the mice. Okay, then we take the babies that survived the birth defects and we cross the babies. The babies never got exposed except through the father line. Well, they continue on with birth defects. So this is called the legacy. Once you introduce a mutation, you're injecting the muscle, it gets its way into the germ cells, carries on to the population, it carries in the line. That's why this thing is a weapon of mass destruction. You're not just affecting the non-combatants, you're affecting the generations. This is heresy, Dr. Pang. You're telling me that something that exposes the parents carries on to the generations? Come on. Duh. Absolutely. What's the first thing physicians ask when somebody gets a cancer? Does this run in your family? Genetic inheritance, mutations. Some things do and some things really carry on. So someone has to introduce a mutation which seems to carry into the germ lines, at least in mice, and that's why we're afraid. It carries downstream as well. Okay, now, let's go over Pohakuloa. All this stuff they tell us. They're never quite clear, they're never quite transparent. We're asking to do the samples. Remember, they told us there was no DU at all. Then they said, oh yeah, there's DU, but it's 700, whatever it is, spotting rounds, because that's what we have records for. Well, first of all, you told us there was nothing. Now that you tell us there's 700, why stop there? Why don't we just go do a survey and see how much there really is? Okay. Then you hear all this stuff like, well, DU is not dangerous. I agree. A bowling ball of DU, that's not dangerous. But in the dust form, in the oxide forms, it is. So when they tell you it's not dangerous, pin them down. Dust, DU, dust in the oxide form. Go ahead, make a statement about that. Okay? Now, you go up there and they tell you this is all safe. We've worked this out. Let me draw a very good analogy for you. Cancer and smoking. You get the tobacco, you put it in the cigarettes. You smoke the cigarettes, and then after you smoke the cigarettes, there's ashes. Now, if I were to point to the cigarette that's not burned, the tobacco, is that dangerous? No, I didn't smoke it. I didn't inhale it. But if I were to chop up the tobacco and inhale it, is that dangerous? Probably not. It's not burned. So in and of itself, the tobacco is not dangerous. When you burn it, that's dangerous. The lit cigarette that you inhale is dangerous. Okay. Then afterwards, I see the ashes in your ashtray. Is that dangerous? No, that's ashes sitting there. So let me complete the analogy for you. Depleted uranium, is that dangerous? No, it's sitting there as a lump. Okay. The minute you burn it or explode it and the dust comes out in the form of oxides too, that's really dangerous. Yes. And then it blows away or settles back down on the ground. The big chunks settle, the small stuff blows and we breathe it. That stuff on the ground, is that dangerous? No, that's like ashes. Well, then why are we worried? This was actually the military said. The dangerous stuff blew away, the stuff sitting on the ground, so you're not inhaling it until you bomb it again. There's really, once again, time for physics. What's the difference between a rapidly moving DU particle hitting a target, blowing up and exploding, burning, versus a chunk of DU material left over that gets hit by a bomb shrapnel at a very high speed? I checked the speed. Will a shrapnel hitting the DU versus the DU hitting a stationary particle, isn't that the same thing? Yes, physics said yes it is. So when you keep bombing and hitting these DU particles, the DU remnants, you'll burn them, you stir up more dust, and then of course some of the dust, you just stir it up more for us to breathe. That's why the bombing and the stirring up of dust generates more till all your remnants are burned. Well, how much remnants were there? I have no idea. At first you said 0, now you say spotting rounds. I think it's time we go do a good survey and measure it. Trying to say DU is safe, yeah, DU is safe, but dust form isn't. Well, even DU dust, Dr. Pang, we know from guys who mill, guys who get the uranium or depleted uranium and mill and make little, shape the weapons to put in the bullet. Well, they don't have a problem. Yeah, because that's not DU oxide, that's DU, straight DU metal. And the final thing I would like to say is that we did monitor outside Pohakuloa training camp, the Girl Scout camps. We monitored 20,000 minutes in Kona. And we know what the Geiger counter readings look like. When we went up there, we had these 6 or 7 spikes in 6 hours, way off in left field. It's supposed to be like 20 or 30 counts per minute, normal background radiation. All of a sudden, there's 6 or 7 kind of high end. We didn't know what to do with them. And it could be cosmic rays coming through at high elevation, but it could be depleted uranium blowing in on the dust. And then when I presented this before our state legislature, someone said, Dr. Pang, you saw all of a sudden, instead of 25 counts per minute, Geiger counter, 72. Do you realize how big a chunk of uranium you need to raise it to 72? And he held his hands up like this. These are Geiger counters measuring the dust. Do you realize how big a chunk of uranium you need to set it to 72? I thought I had done my calculations. So I went home, within 4 hours, I did my calculations. I copied him. I said, here's my calculations based on weight and based on area. Here it is right here. See that period on the paper? It's about 1/100th the size of that. That's my calculation. What's yours? But when they insinuate, they plant this doubt. Do you realize how big a chunk of dust you need to, he didn't actually say this big. But we're dealing with this kind of people. Sorry, we're dealing with this kind of people. But I've seen strange arguments against what I have learned and what Mike Reimer, emeritus professor, and Doug Rocky, PhD, health physics, Rosalie Bertel, the late Rosalie Bertel, PhD physics. I just don't see their arguments. And all we're asking is to be a reasonable, go ahead, let's do a survey. Let's not depend on existing or non-existing records of what was brought in. Do a survey. Do not dismiss it that this is not a health effect until you can show me you've taken into account dust. Good luck, because the millirems things do not talk that much about internal exposure, and depleted uranium oxides, which clear the body in decades instead of weeks. So we'll just leave it at that.
The U.S. military is unregulated. The first state of Hawaii legislation on military pollution was House Bill 1452 in 2007. Despite overwhelming community support, 1452 failed to pass. Now, interestingly, a short time later, the U.S. Army Garrison, then the State of Hawaii Public Health Department, published websites about Hawaii's contamination of DU. Now, both agencies claim no public health harm. Both agencies cite similar references. Both agencies are ignoring the science of dust migration and the chemical differences between DU and DU oxides. Therefore, both are ignoring the potential public health impacts, and neither agency provides any proof of their claims of no harm. That's Pohakuloa's Earth Day fraud, claiming it is safe when it is not, and it seems like these state and federal agencies are in collusion. Here's another way to look at this unregulated military pollution. Before 1893, Hawaii was a neutral nation. Many see live fire training as violations of international law and war crimes against a friendly nation under the rules of occupation. By really comprehending this view, you might see the daily bombardment of live fire training here differently. We do not consent to your war games. Now is time to decommission, clean up your pollution, and remove all weapons of war from the Hawaiian Islands.